This video is about a fictional kingdom called Great Britain, nowadays the United Kingdom, but it's fictional and it's fraudulent. This flag is a lie. It's a myth. It's part of a narrative generated by a state. This is the second part of a two-part story. You will have seen the first part. In the first part, the proof I've just mentioned exists. This part tells you the profound effect that truth has on Scotland going forward. So here is the name of the first one: Fictional Kingdom, Fraudulent State, Part 1 of 2. If you search that in YouTube, you'll find the video. The narrative of the British state has been for decades and centuries that the official narrative is that Scotland and England, as two sovereign kingdoms, came together to form one united kingdom, one territory, one crown. It did not. The truth is we were kidnapped. The first video in this set of two ended with this paragraph. I'll read it again. A voluntary merger of two nations into a new and an entirely unified state is an entirely different proposition from a seizure of one nation by another, as different as a marriage is from kidnapping, and its implications for Scotland's rights to self-determination are profound. The rest of this video is covering the phrase, the last sentence, self-determination are profound. In recent history, Scotland's status within the Union has been presented at home and internationally as we being a willing partner in the creation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. This is the official narrative, and as you know from the first video of Fictional Kingdom, Fraudulent State, you now know it is a lie. In 1952 to 54, there was a commission into the Constitution that looked at Scotland and Scotland's affairs. This was following the coronation of the English Queen Elizabeth II. But there was no agreement between Scotland and England for a unified country, a unified crown, and a unified kingdom. They soon abandoned the aim and function of the Treaty and Acts of Union, and they adopted an alternative course of action. This course of action left the crowns of both kingdoms in place, and only uniting them by adding Scotland to the domains listed in the English coronation oath, so that England became crown overlord of Scotland. This is what England did, or Britain did, to all the countries of its empire, Scotland being just one on the list. So it's all a lie. It doesn't matter who says it, what document says it, or anything. The lie about a unified state is simply a lie. It was contrived to deflect international attention from Scotland's position within the UK and to establish the precedence of the rights of the state of the United Kingdom of Great Britain over those of the component nation of Scotland. Its most important implication for Scottish independence is that the UK state created the word voluntary. In the actual treaty, that word is not there. And it's been said so often that international agreement between England and Scotland represents the expression of Scotland's self-determination, according to the official narrative. It's now realised in the United Kingdom, which has a long-standing legal entity and the same rights to security and integrity of a sovereign state. There is no sovereign state called the United Kingdom, but there is a state called the United Kingdom. Under the constitutional constraints, and as the co-creator of such a state, Scotland cannot lawfully dismantle its own voluntary creation, voluntary in quotes, unilaterally in the same way that parents cannot abandon the child or violate the rights of the child they have co-created. This is the single greatest barrier to Scotland's exercise of its rights to self-determination as guaranteed by the United Nations Charter. But it is a paper barrier constructed from a lie that represents a fatal weakness in the fortress of the official narrative of the UK, and a lie which has continued to defend that fortress simply because it has never been exposed. Knowledge is power. Scots have been kept intentionally ignorant of the legal framework on which the United Kingdom is founded, have been rendered powerless through their ignorance. They have been captured by centuries-old propaganda which has convinced the nation that it is only with the Westminster government and the UK courts that any remedy exists for anything. Today, however, international laws and agreements, which did not exist when Westminster attempted to reclassify Scotland as Northern Britain in the 1950s, nowadays hold governments to the terms of their treaties and uphold the sovereign rights of nations and peoples. If we Scots knew the truth about Scotland's annexation, the truth that we are subject to a foreign sovereignty, the truth that the Crown in Parliament is the English Crown in the English Parliament with an English constitution and a history of colonisation, genocide and plunder in Scotland, that history is hidden. The truth that there exists no legal foundation for the state styling itself the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that this state is, in fact, a legal fiction, can set Scotland free today. As this definition of independence taken from a dictionary states, if you don't have full sovereignty, you must be a dependent territory or a colony. I'm now going to talk briefly about the rights of people over a state in the United Nations law. Holding a nation and the people as a dependency, or in other words, a colony, subject to a foreign sovereignty, in our case England, has become a crime in international law, and the UK is a signatory to the law on colonisation that I'm going to talk about later. The rights of the state to its integrity and security take second place to the rights of the people within that state to exercise their self-determination and free themselves from colonisation. Remember, this is the laws that England signed up to under the guise of the UK in the 1950s at the start of the empire decolonisation process that started at that time. Westminster and the Anglo-British state have no say in the processes by which a colonised people may determine their own fate, no rights to grant or refuse permission, and no part to play in any democratic event Scotland may adopt to end the misery and injustice of our colonial condition. So if we, Scotland, can prove to the United Nations that we are indeed a colony, then in that law, the United Kingdom cannot interfere in the process. It cannot stop us under United Nations guidance having a referendum to generate our own freedom, our own rights. Therefore, the truth is that our colonised status, when proven, will be a game changer. In itself, knowing that we're colonised cannot automatically free Scotland. There is a process after this which will require us eventually to hold a referendum. But it can remove the chains of Westminster has forged. It can remove the lies so that the whole world knows the lie that Scotland is a dependency and a colony of London, a colony of England. The truth is, this will give us international recognition and that is what defines an independent state. It holds the hope of restoration of Scotland's constitution, the right, interest and peoples of the Crown, to get our sovereign nation back again. Despite the many assertions of the British establishment to the contrary, despite the imposition of English territorial and judicial sovereignty by fiat, fiat simply means it's the way it is, and it's the way it's been forced, and the way we accept it now because it's been going so long. And above all, despite the co-opting and disposal of Scotland's territorial assets, as though these were the assets of a single United Kingdom, the ownership of Scotland remains vested not in the person of the monarch or the state, but in the Crown of Scotland, which is the people. The United Kingdom has been taking Scottish assets from our territory illegally, since no agreement exists by which to transfer this ownership to a foreign English crown. This means that every barrel of oil, every litre of gas, every kilowatt of renewable energy, and every penny of profit from the sale of resources has been an act of theft by the English state, or in international law, a wrongful act of a state. And that's because it took over our state by force, by conceit, by subterfuge. It was not a voluntary union. Before I conclude the later part of this report, here is some text from the actual laws, there's lots more than this, from the actual laws in the United Nations, shown here in the photograph. So, what this basically says people have the permanent right to sovereignty over their natural resources, and it's inalienable, it can't be transferred. So, the rights of sovereignty by state and people may be confusing in some passage of the law, but clearly emerges as a whole. It also follows from the status of permanent sovereignty as a basic constituent of the rights of people to self-determination. You saw in the first part of this video that the sovereignty did not transfer to England. The sovereignty stayed with us, the people. So we have the right to our self-determination in law. The right to sovereignty includes the right of peoples to gain effective control. The General Assembly supports efforts of the developing countries and of the peoples of the territories under colonial and racial domination and foreign occupation in their struggle to get freedom. The right to permanent sovereignty also includes, in cases of violation, the right to restitution and full compensation. This is very important because we will get restitution in theory. This is the UN buildings in Switzerland, not America. So the right of all states, territories and peoples under foreign occupation, which is us, alien and colonial domination or apartheid, to restitution in full compensation for the exploitations and deletion of and damages to the natural resources of the territories and peoples. Restitution and full compensation for their exploitation and depletion of and damages to the natural resources to the people. This is what the Anglo-British state has feared all along. This is why the Royal Commission of Scottish Affairs was convened in 1952 to reframe Scotland as a voluntary co-creator of a partnership-based state. It was only in 1954, when this commission ended, that London started talking about a voluntary union. It didn't exist before. And the reason they did this was post-Second World War. The empires of Britain and France were all getting broken up, and up to the 1970s France and Britain gave away its empire, it gave away its colonies. And the UK did this in this commission 52 to 54 to reframe it so that Scotland came as a cooperative voluntary partner instead of which they knew which was a colony. And this is why the creation of a liberation movement with the ability to organise within the United Nations and to make every representative of every member state aware of the criminal fraud of the United Kingdom and our true colonised status of Scotland. In February 2025, after 3 years of effort, the process started at the UN in Geneva to put forward Scotland's case and prove to the world and to our people that we are a colony. It is time for supporters of Scottish independence to understand that independence is another word for decolonisation. While the term independence may appear to hang on the golden standard of Westminster permission, based on what's happened over the last 10 years since 2014, a negotiated agreement between the state and the component nation, decolonisation, is not. Once again, we can do this with the UN, and although the Westminster will scream and shout when the time comes suitable to them, they can do nothing about it. So decolonisation means taking the fight to the coloniser. It means demanding and fighting for the rights we have been denied for so long by the oppression of the Great British State. It means restoration of our constitution and our rights and our sovereignty and repatriation for that which was stolen from us. It means justice at last instead of the begging bowl. It means our liberation. It means our freedom, to get our sovereignty back, to be a free people again. The campaign to get the information to the state where we can go to the United Nations started in 2020 when Professor Alfred Baird wrote the book Doon Hadden. Doon Hadden is Scots for held down, in other words oppressed. About a year after this, a group of people created the organisation Salvo. Their objective was to build the case and prove the case that Scotland is a colony of England, so that they can go to the United Nations, to the Decolonisation Committee, and get the world to know our status as a dependent colony. They created Liberation Scotland to comply with United Nations rules. These people got us where we are today. On the 7th of March, they formally put the information towards the United Nations, but it only became public on the 11th of March. The Liberation Scotland Committee is pleased to announce, they said, that the next step in the process of decolonisation of Scotland and the recovery of our nationhood has commenced with the submission of Scotland's case to United Nations Special Committee on Decolonisation. If you go to the site www.liberation.scot and page down to the initial press release, you will find a blue button that says Press Release. Click on this and you'll get 8 documents. If you look at those documents, it'll increase your understanding of what's going on. All my videos in my channel on YouTube were all created by me, based on information from Salvo, from my own library which I've been building since 2010, and also the internet. But this talk, these 2 videos called Fictional Kingdom, Fraudulent State, all the text came from one person, Sarah Salyers. I thank you, Sarah, and I hope you don't mind me using this. The information I used was written by Sarah and published on the blog by the late Ian Lawson called Years for Scotland. That was in June 24. It was republished again in August. Ian's blog, Years for Scotland, is still online and it's got a mass of information within it. If you go into that blog, Years for Scotland, and search Fictional Kingdom, Fraudulent State, you'll find that document. Thank you again, Sarah. This is a repeat of my historical videos that I showed you in the first one of two of Fictional Kingdom, Fraudulent State. So, I'm now going to do these slides here over the next year. If you always want to see my slides instead of remembering what they're called, if you go into the YouTube and in the search line where the magnifying glass is and you type in @RobertAnderson9116, you will always get my videos. I hope you found these two linked videos, Fictitious Kingdom, Fraudulent State, interesting. It's certainly an eye-opener. Thank you for listening.